Before the world's most famous star was even gone, her housekeeper was already scrubbing the floors with bleach, trying to erase a secret that could have shaken Hollywood to its core. Eunice Murray wasn't just cleaning up a mess. She was trying to make sure no one ever discovered a hidden room the studios were desperate to keep quiet. If you think you know what happened on Marilyn Monroe's final night, you haven't heard the story of the small white object history tried to wash away. The smell of bleach at 3 a.m. shouldn't belong to a Hollywood legend's bedroom, yet it is the scent the neighbors would whisper about for the next 60 years. This clinical aroma cut through the floral perfume of the California night, signaling that the Fifth Helena Drive estate had fundamentally shifted. While the world dreamt of the silver screen goddess in shimmering gowns, a quiet tragedy was being scrubbed away. Eunice Murray was committing a desperate crime of mercy, an erasure of history to save a soul. She wasn't just washing ordinary linens, she was battling a ticking clock, desperately trying to hide something small, white and heartbreaking before the world burst through the door and the sirens already wailing in the distance arrived to claim the narrative. In the early hours of that 1962 Saturday, a single window remained glowing like a lonely star. Inside, the woman's history is remembered simply as the housekeeper was moving with a frantic, silent purpose. This was a ritual of profound sorrow. We often think of these icons as untouchable, yet in the quiet hours, they are as fragile as any of us. Eunice had seen the woman behind the mask, the girl named Norma Jeane who just wanted a place to belong. She knew that in 40 minutes the coroner would arrive, and the Marilyn mask would be the only thing the world would care to see. The house itself seemed to hold its breath as the shadows grew longer, every creak of the floorboards sounding like a heavy sigh from a woman who had given too much of herself to the light. Eunice remembered how Marilyn would pace the hallway in her bare feet, discarding the high-heeled shoes and the signature red lipstick that served as her public armor. In these moments, the house became a sanctuary rather than a prison. The kitchen table, once cluttered with scripts and telegrams, now felt like an altar to a life being unraveled by the very hands that built it. Eunice had spent countless evenings here, brewing tea for Norma Jeane, who felt she was disappearing behind the neon glow of her own fame. As the washing machine began its rhythmic, heavy thrum, it sounded like a heartbeat echoing through a house grown suddenly cold. The hot, steaming water swirled around fabrics that held the secrets of a lifetime. To the outside world, Eunice was just a footnote in a police report, but in that moment, she was a guardian standing at the gates of a collapsing kingdom. She was preserving the dignity of a friend who was the golden girl who finally traded her spotlight for the soft, eternal velvet of the night. Every agitation of the machine felt like a sob caught in a throat. Eunice knew that when the sun rose, the world would come knocking, hungry for scandal. They would demand answers about phone calls and famous visitors, but she was focused on a secret no one else was supposed to see. It was a discovery that would have broken the hearts of millions. She watched the water drain away, carrying the physical evidence of a night that changed everything, leaving only the haunting echo of what might have been. In the sterile glow of the laundry room, Eunice held on to a truth never meant for the headlines. The chores were nearly finished, but the real work of keeping a secret was only just beginning. As she reached into the basin for the sodden cloth, she realized that some stains, the stains of deep systemic loneliness, simply never come out. Marilyn did not refer to Eunice as a mere employee. She called her a guardian. While the public saw a house filled with glamour, one door in that Brentwood bungalow remained tucked away from prying eyes. It was a forbidden space, a room that did not appear on any floor plan, a sanctuary of shadows where the most famous woman in the world kept her only cherished dream. Even the powerful men in D.C. didn't know this room existed. This tiny space at the end of the hallway was painted a soft, calming shade of primrose yellow. For months, Eunice had watched her employer slip into this room after the makeup was washed away. There, the superstar would vanish, and the girl who had grown up in foster homes would emerge to run her fingers over fabric soft enough for a miracle. The room was a nursery, built on the hope that the cycles of a lonely childhood could finally be broken. To the studio, she was a commodity, but in the silence of this yellow room, she was a woman longing to hear a heartbeat other than her own. Eunice had witnessed the quiet preparation, the meticulous organization of a small chest of drawers filled with tiny lace socks and soft cotton gowns. Beside a half-finished knitting project sat a specific book on child development, its pages dog-eared with hope. There was no scandal here, only the human ache for a family that stayed just out of reach. They would sit together, speaking of names and lullabies, a bond forged in a shared understanding of what it meant to want something money could never buy. If this side of Marilyn, the woman who just wanted to be a mother, moves you more than the glamour ever did, please hit the like button. It helps us tell the stories of the real people hidden behind these golden icons, ensuring their true legacy isn't forgotten. There were afternoons when the sun would stream through the yellow curtains, casting a warm, golden glow that made the nursery feel like a promise that was finally coming true. Marilyn would sit in the wicker, rocking chair, her eyes bright with a rare, uncomplicated joy as she discussed the color of yarn for a new set of blankets. She wanted everything to be perfect, from the lace on the curtains to the scent of lavender in the drawers, as if she were crafting a world where sorrow simply wasn't allowed to enter. Eunice would watch from the doorway, seeing not the world's most famous actress, but a woman finally allowing herself to be soft. These were the hours that Eunice carried with her for 40 years, the memories of a hope so pure it felt as though it could never be broken. As the summer of 1962 progressed, the light in that yellow room began to dim. The world outside demanded more than she had to give, and the nursery started to feel like a ghost. Eunice saw her friend stand in the doorway, shoulders slumped, looking at the empty crib as if mourning someone who hadn't even arrived. Every tiny garment was a testament to the life Marilyn desperately wanted, far away. From the flashing bulbs, her greatest sorrow was wrapped in the softest wool. It was not a diamond necklace or a white mink stole that Marilyn cherished most during those final weeks. Tucked beneath her pillow was a small, hand-knitted blanket woven with uneven stitches. This humble gift had arrived in a plain brown parcel from a woman who still remembered the girl named Norma Jeane before the world turned her into a statue of gold. Eunice saw the truth, a woman who would trade every headline for one afternoon of being a daughter. The ivory-colored blanket smelled of cedar and rosewater, and Marilyn would hold it against her cheek like a life raft. Eunice looked at that wool and knew if the police saw it, they would turn a mother's hope into a tabloid's curiosity. Marilyn's hands had trembled when she first unwrapped it. This blanket was the first real thing to enter the yellow nursery, a blessing from a surrogate mother who knew that beneath the platinum hair was a soul, searching for home. As the nights grew colder, the blanket moved to Marilyn's own bed. It became a source of strength when the voices on the phone demanded more than she had left. Eunice would often find her asleep, gripping that rough, hand-spun wool as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. It was a symbol of a legacy she hoped to start, a dream of a child who would never know the sting of rejection. The evening air had turned unusually cold for August, as if the California coast were offering a warning that the season of grace was coming to a close. Marilyn had spent the twilight hours staring out at the garden, her fingers tracing the patterns of the knitted blanket with a rhythmic, nervous intensity. She spoke very little, but her silence was heavy with the weight of a woman who was tired of being a symbol and desperate to be a person. Eunice brought her a glass of warm milk, and for a brief moment they shared a look of profound, silent understanding. It was the look of two women standing on the edge of a great, dark ocean, knowing that the tide was coming in and there was nowhere left to run. But even the warmest wool cannot protect a heart from a winter that settles in from the inside. As the calendar turned toward that fateful August night, the blanket became a piece of evidence in a tragedy no one saw coming. The telephone did not ring for a powerful executive, it rang for a mother who never came, a silent plea echoing into a void. Eunice sat in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator her only company, as she watched the light under Marilyn's door. She knew the rhythm of her friend's heart, and tonight it was a frantic staccato beat. Marilyn had spent hours near the phone, twisting the cord like a rosary. She was waiting for a call that would validate the yellow room. Eunice knew that if the cold voice on the other end ever became public, the world would see Marilyn as a casualty of empty promises. When the phone finally rang, the conversation was brief, ending with the hollow click of a line going through. Eunice heard the receiver hit the cradle, followed by the gut-wrenching sob of a child left behind at the fair. She entered the room to find Marilyn at her vanity, her reflection distorted by tears. On the nightstand sat a cream-colored note, 12 words long, written in a hand that trembled with disappointment. The ink was slightly smeared, the paper heavy with the weight of a final rejection. It spoke of a future being retracted, of a door being slammed shut on the family she craved. Eunice took the woman's hands, feeling how ice-cold they were. They sat for hours, bound by a secret, becoming a shroud. Marilyn whispered that she was too tired to keep building a home in a world made of shifting sand. Eunice realized the light in her friend's soul was finally fading toward the soft, eternal velvet of the night. As the clock ticked toward midnight, the superstar lay down, clutching that hand-knitted blanket as her only shield against the encroaching dark. Eunice retreated to the hallway, the 12-word note burning a hole in her memory, its rejection feeling like a physical weight she was now forced to carry alone. She stood as a silent sentinel for a dream that was fading away forever, listening to the shallow breathing of a woman who had finally run out of reasons to stay awake. The house grew heavy with the scent of lavender and the cold stillness of an ending that felt both inevitable and impossible. But as the room settled into a tragic peace, the hallway light flickered and the silence was shattered by the sharp, rhythmic crunch of boots on the gravel driveway, signaling that the world had arrived to claim what was left. Eunice did not find a world-famous star when she pushed open that bedroom door. She found a broken girl who had run out of light. The room was bathed in the ghostly glow of the moon, filtering through palms, casting skeletal shadows across the white carpet. There was no grand finale, only the devastating silence of a house that had lost its heartbeat. Eunice felt the coldness of the brass door handle biting into her palm, a physical chill matching the sudden stillness. Marilyn lay there, her golden hair spread across the pillow like a halo that had lost its luster. The silence that followed the discovery was not empty. It was filled with the ghosts of every laugh and every tear that had ever crossed those four walls. Eunice stood at the foot of the bed, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps as she realized that the guardian's role had changed in an instant from protecting a life to protecting a legacy. The yellow room, just down the hall, felt as though it had become a tomb for a future that would never arrive, its primrose walls mocking the stillness of the night. She looked at the woman who had captivated nations and saw only the exhaustion of a soul that had fought 1,000 wars without ever finding a peace that lasted. In that terrible, crystal-clear moment, Eunice knew that the world would never be allowed to see this vulnerability. They would never be allowed to turn this sacred sorrow into a spectacle. In this quiet moment, she was just Norma Jeane again, the girl from the foster home searching for a place where she wouldn't feel invisible. Eunice touched the porcelain skin, and the reality settled into her bones. The scene was far more intimate than what the newspapers would describe. Marilyn wasn't alone when she departed from this life. She was surrounded by the remnants of the life she had tried to build. Her hand was inches away from the telephone that had failed her. On the floor lay a single white leather bootie bought for the yellow room. Seeing that small object of unfulfilled promise, Eunice's composure shattered. The official reports would talk about bottles, but they would never mention the tiny shoe or the look of profound longing etched into the star's features. Eunice realized Marilyn had passed away not from a lack of success, but from a heart that could no longer carry its own dreams. The house was a museum of what might have been. The guardian knew the world would soon descend like vultures, tearing apart the reputation of a woman they never knew. She had to protect the dignity of the girl who was now beyond the reach of the flashbulbs. Eunice looked at the 12-word note and knew the truth was too fragile for the public. She stood up, wiped her eyes with her apron, and looked toward the yellow room. The men in suits would be here within the hour, and she had very little time to erase the traces of the dream that had come to a close. When the black sedans pulled into the gravel driveway, the men who stepped out were not carrying comfort. Eunice watched from behind the lace curtains, her heart hammering as the tires crunched on stone. She recognized the sharp cut of their suits, the fixers, erasing experts from the shadows of the big studios who were paid to make inconvenient truths disappear. They were not there to honor the woman. They were there to sanitize a legend. One tall figure checked his gold watch with an impatient flick and dismissively pushed aside Marilyn's personal books. He didn't ask if she was all right. He looked at her with a cold clinical detachment and said, "You're just the help, Eunice. Don't make this difficult. Tell me where the complications are hidden." The first light of that Sunday morning didn't bring the usual California warmth. It brought a cold clinical clarity that seemed to strip the house of its magic. As these fixers moved through the rooms with their clipboards and hushed tones, searching for phone logs and personal letters, the air grew thick with the smell of stale coffee and cigarette smoke, an intrusion that felt like a violation. Eunice watched as they began to box up the intimate remnants of a life, their movements devoid of reverence. To them, she was a brand to be protected. To Eunice, she was a friend whose last breath was still cooling in the room next door. There was a moment when the lead fixer paused at the door of the primrose yellow room, his hand lingering on the knob. Eunice felt her heart stop, her hand tightening around the damp cloth she still held, ready to throw herself in his path. He didn't see a nursery. He saw an embarrassment that didn't fit the glamorous narrative. He eventually turned away, but the look of calculation in his eyes told Eunice the world didn't want the woman who wanted to be a mother. They wanted the myth. Eunice stood her ground, blocking the path. If these men found the yellow room, they would turn Marilyn's dream into a scandalous headline. To protect Marilyn's dignity was to protect her secrets. The fixers were already shuffling through drawers, their gloved hands touching the belongings of a woman who could no longer protest. Eunice knew if she didn't hide the nursery herself, these men would. Take the items, and they would be destroyed or locked in a vault forever. She remembered the way Marilyn had carefully tucked the ivory blanket under the mattress, a secret stash of comfort. She could see the edge of the wool peeking out now, and the sight of it made her blood run cold as the fixers moved closer to the bed. To them, it was just evidence, but to Eunice, it was the essence of the woman who was gone. She had to weave a shield of silence, even if it meant becoming the villain in a story she never asked to be a part of. With a steady hand, she began the process of erasing the hope so the memory could remain pure. She turned toward the laundry room, realizing she would have to sacrifice her own reputation in the history books to save her friend's soul. The world would see her washing the linens and call it a cover-up, never imagining she was cleansing a sanctuary of its heartbreak. As Sunday morning bled over the horizon, the mechanical rhythm of the washing machine signaled a lie that would last for 40 years. The drum of the machine was the only heartbeat left. The 3-minute final spin felt like an eternity. Eunice could hear the heavy thud of the machine against the floor, a sound that competed with the boots of the fixers in the hallway. The bleach stung her eyes and burned her skin, a baptism and a burial at once. She gathered the lace socks and the white booty to hide them in plain sight. Every agitation of the machine was a jolt in her own chest. If the fixers found these, they would tell the world the screen goddess was delusional. Eunice could not let that happen. By the time the cycle reached the final spin, the sun was casting golden fingers across the floor. Eunice pulled the heavy, sodden fabrics from the machine. They were sterile now. She hung the linens where they would blend in with ordinary chores. Investigators would later remark on how odd it was to find a housekeeper doing laundry at such an hour. Eunice accepted their glares with a stoic silence, knowing the secret of the yellow room was safe in the damp fibers of a blanket. As the sirens eventually faded and the house was sealed behind yellow tape, Eunice found herself standing at the edge of the small garden Marilyn had tended. The white primroses were still there, petals closed against the morning chill. The garden was a map to a future that had been cruelly diverted, a place where Marilyn had knelt in the dirt just days before, trying to prove she could start over. Eunice reached down and plucked a single weed from the flower bed, a quiet act of maintenance in a world that had just fallen apart. This patch of earth was the only place left where Marilyn's simpler dreams were still allowed to exist. She leaned her forehead against the vibrating machine and closed her eyes. She heard the heavy boots of the investigators near the laundry door, but the cycle still had 3 minutes to go. For 40 years, Eunice took that secret to her quiet church pews and to the edge of her own sunset. She became a woman of shadows, a suspicious accomplice in the eyes of the press. To the world, she was a villain, but to Norma Jeane, she was the only friend who never betrayed her. The weeks that followed were a blur of depositions, but in the dead of night, Eunice would still hear the phantom echoes of Marilyn's laughter drifting from the yellow room. It was the soft, giggling hope of Norma Jeane imagining a future stolen away. Every time a reporter asked about the suspicious laundry, Eunice felt the weight of the ivory blanket pressing against her conscience, a warm secret that kept her grounded while the world spun into a frenzy of conspiracy. By becoming the villain, she created a vacuum where Marilyn's dignity could finally rest undisturbed. Eunice began to collect the ordinary things the fixers had overlooked: a worn-out gardening glove, a recipe for a simple stew scribbled on a script, and a single wooden block from the nursery. These weren't artifacts for a museum. They were the holy relics of a life lived in the quiet intervals. She tucked them away in the cedar chest alongside the ivory blanket, creating a private museum of a woman the world chose to forget. To Eunice, these were the evidence of the crime history committed, the refusal to let Marilyn Monroe be ordinary. The weight of 40 years is a heavy burden, a walk through a valley of whispers. Eunice watched as movies were filmed, each missing the mark of the woman she truly knew. She saw the actress portrayed as a victim or a seductress, but never as the mother she longed to be. She found comfort in the quiet rhythm of her own life, knowing the secret of the ivory blanket was safe from the vultures of history. She had traded the world's respect for the peace of a promise kept. Eunice Murray chose to be the world's villain to keep a friend's secret, and I want to know what you think of that sacrifice. Do you believe her silence was the ultimate act of love? Or did the world deserve to know the truth sooner? Let's talk about her choice in the comments below. As the decades passed, the face of the goddess on every billboard never grew old, but Eunice saw the tear-stained cheeks of a woman dreaming of a nursery that would never hear a lullaby. People would knock on her door, offering money for a tell-all book, but she always turned them away. How could she tell them the most sensational thing about that night was profound human loneliness? She was the only person left who knew why the linens were really being washed. In her final years, she was no longer afraid of judgment. She had traded her own reputation for a friend's soul. As her strength flickered, Eunice made a final trip to the cedar chest. In 2005, the truth finally emerged. Nestled among yellowed clippings was a single hand-knitted blanket of ivory wool still holding the faint scent of lavender. Beside it lay a letter in Eunice's careful long hand. It was a raw account of why a simple woman chose to be the villain. She wrote that when she found the star had slipped away, her first instinct was to protect what the world would surely destroy. She wrote that, on that final evening, Marilyn had sat on the edge of the crib, wrapping the ivory blanket around her shoulders and whispering that she finally felt ready. She wasn't a tragic figure then. She was a woman full of hope. The 12-word note spoke of a promise retracted, a final blow to a heart stretched to the breaking point. Eunice had allowed herself to be shamed so the image of the girl in the yellow room would remain untainted. That shoebox was a time capsule of a maternal bond, proving the most important people are the ones who keep our secrets even when it costs them everything. As the letter was read and the wool touched by new hands, the shadow over Eunice Murray's name finally lifted. The maid's lie was the greatest act of friendship Hollywood had ever seen. Take a moment to think of the ivory blanket in your own life, the person who held your secrets when you were too fragile to carry them. The legend of Marilyn Monroe does not belong to the studios. It belongs to a quiet guardian who knew that a woman's dignity is worth more than the truth the world demands. The story of the Fifth Helena Drive estate is a lesson in the power of a secret kept out of love. We now know Eunice was protecting the only piece of heaven Norma Jeane had ever managed to build. She was preserving the yellow walls and the hope of a nursery that the world was too cynical to honor. Eunice accepted the judgment of history because some things are too sacred to be put on display. She saw a girl who had reached the end of her journey while clutching a dream of family. Marilyn found love not in the applause of millions, but in the loyalty of a woman willing to let her own name be tarnished. It is a reminder that the most important people are the ones who notice when our light is flickering and quietly step in to guard the flame. They wash away the stains of our sorrows long after we have gone to our final rest. As the sun sets over the hills of Hollywood, the ivory blanket is no longer evidence of a tragedy, but a symbol of a quiet victory. Marilyn Monroe finally found peace in the heart of a friend who refused to let the world see her as anything less than a woman who wanted to love and be loved. The legacy of the Guardian remains a testament to the grace we can show one another. We will always carry the girl in our hearts, knowing someone was there to hold her hand when the camera stopped. Even as the house on Fifth Helena Drive changed owners, the spirit of the Guardian never wavered. Eunice would sometimes find herself sitting in her own small home, her hands moving in the familiar rhythm of folding laundry, feeling a sharp connection to that August night. She knew the world would uncover parts of the story, but they would never find the heart of it. That belonged to the two of them. As she closed her eyes for the last time, she didn't see the flashbulbs. She saw the sun through the yellow curtains and felt the soft wool of an ivory blanket, knowing the girl who wanted to belong had finally found her way home in the silence of a promise kept. True loyalty is rare, and the story of the Guardian's ivory blanket is a testament to the friends who protect us when we are at our most fragile. If there is someone in your life who has always held your secrets and guarded your light, share this video with them today to let them know they matter. Every act of kindness is a stitch in a blanket that keeps the world warmer, and together, we can make sure the stories of the heart are the ones that live on forever. If the story of the Guardian's secret touched you, hit the like button to honor the woman behind the legend and subscribe to join us for more deep dives into history's hidden truths. Every act of loyalty deserves to be remembered. Thank you for being part of our community.